Chapter Spooks.
G'day. Welcome to Chapter Spooks, where we talk about the books that keep your kids up at night. And today, we have a fun entry in the Bone Chiller series. We're looking at the book, Why I Quit the Babysitter's Club. And come on, you've got to admit, that is a great title. When I first saw it, I thought, is this some sort of a parody of the Babysitter's Club? I mean, that's a contemporary of Goosebumps in these Chapter Spooks books. Maybe this is some kind of a satire? Now, this doesn't end up being a satire, but that's the other thing. Babysitter's Club is meant to be sort of, a quote-unquote book for girls. It's a little bit lighter. It's meant to be more friendly, more fun. So what about the Babysitter's Club could be so horrifying that you need to quit? Interesting question. That gets the cogs turning. So what? I love this title, and turns out I really do enjoy this book as well. But before we get into it, there is an issue with the author, because for the first time, I don't know who ghost wrote this book. Now, there is a name on the cover here. The name on the cover is David Bergantino. But the issue is that David Bergantino is pretty prolific in podcasting and chatting to people, doing interviews, and he has said on more than one occasion that he did not write this book, even though he's credited, but he also said he doesn't know who actually wrote this book. It was just some mistake in publication. So I don't know who wrote this book, at least at time of recording. If I can find out, I'll let you know, but I can't really tell you who wrote this book, and so I do really like this book, but there's a couple of issues that I will get to talking about, but I don't really know who's to blame for these, because I don't know who wrote the book. But let's set that aside for now, because Why I Quit the Babysitter's Club is an interesting book that goes to some interesting places, but it also has some fun in there. On more than one occasion, I actually laughed out loud at some of the silly jokes and things happening in the story. So let's just get into it. This is Bone Chillers number 17, Why I Quit the Babysitter's Club. In chapter 1, we're introduced to Rosie, our main character. She is hanging out with her friend Amber, but they're not having a great time, or at least Rosie isn't, because Amber is also hanging out with her two younger twin brothers. And Rosie is not a fan of her twin brothers, because first of all, she's not a fan of younger kids in general. She finds them to be a bit annoying and gross and dirty. But also, even though her two younger brothers are a little bit older, they still act silly all the time, and for some reason, when Amber is around her brothers, she also seems to act a bit silly. So, as the story begins, the two brothers are talking about how they heard some monster over in Boneyard Woods. Apparently that's not a nickname, that's the official name of it. Apparently 50 years ago some hunter died in there, and so that's why they named it Boneyard Woods. Okay, so it's a little on the nose for a horror story, but it doesn't matter. What matters is, the kids are talking about this monster, they're like, oh man, you should go see it, we heard it growling and stuff, and Rosie's saying, look, you're being silly, obviously there's no monster. And so they start saying, oh, what, you don't want to check it out? What are you, chicken? Like, oh, book, chicken. And this really annoys Rosie, who doesn't like being called a chicken. Especially when Amber, like I said, she gets a bit silly around her brothers. She starts joining in. She says, oh, Amber's not a chicken. She's... And then Amber trails off, heavily implying that she does think her friend is a chicken. So Rosie's basically being peer pressured here. She insists, no, it's silly. I don't want to go in the woods. It can be dangerous in there, whether there's a monster or not. But they say, well, okay, what about if we all go together? We'll go together into the woods, we'll be safe. And if there is something there, we'll ride away quickly. We'll get on our bikes and we'll come home as quick as we can. Rosie explains that she can't ride her bike because it has a flat tire, but then Amber suggests that she ride her sister's bike, Rosie's sister, Judy, who got a brand new mountain bike for her birthday. Rosie doesn't really want to even touch the thing because her sister is so proud of it. It's brand new, it's her birthday present, she'd be in so much trouble if it broke. But Amber insists, and Rosie recognizes that if she doesn't do it, they're all going to think she's chicken. So, Rosie borrows her sister's bike, and they ride off to Boneyard Woods. And there's a tense little scene in the woods there. Long story short, they hear something make a scary loud noise. Rosie and Amber freak out. They race out of the woods whilst the two boys are there running behind them, and they get on their bikes and they try to ride away, but Rosie's so panicking. She's riding, she's looking back behind and over her shoulder, but as she looks over her shoulder one time, suddenly she goes flying off the bike and crashes into the dirt. And she's hurt, but not too badly hurt. So when she turns over her shoulder to look back at the bike, she sees that it has a crumpled front tire because she's crashed it into a tree. And I gotta say, as an inciting incident, this is a pretty good one, because it turns out that when she gets home, her sister is furious, her parents are upset with her, and they say that they'll get a new bike, but in order to punish her for having stolen and wrecking her sister's bike, she needs to pay for it out of her own pocket. So, in the next chapter, when she heads to school to talk to Amber, Amber's like, what went on? And she tells her all that happened, that she got in trouble and she needs to pay for this bike. But Rosie doesn't have a job or pocket money, she doesn't know how she's going to pay for this, but Amber suggests that she try babysitting, just like she does. Rosie is not enthusiastic about this idea, she's not a big fan of kids or changing diapers, but when Amber insists that it can make good money, she says she might give it a go. Unfortunately, Rosie doesn't even know how to get started. She doesn't know anyone who needs a babysitter at the moment, but luckily Amber does. She explains that there's a new family who comes into town, and she doesn't know them too well, but she thinks that their husband is a doctor, and she thinks they said they had a baby girl that they needed sitting for, but they need a babysitter this weekend. And I like that Rosie's suspicious at first, thinking, okay, well, if they need a babysitter, why can't you sit for them? Is there something weird about them? But no, Amber insists, oh no, it's because I've already got a job. I'm babysitting for the Gleasons this weekend, but if you could babysit for them on Saturday, could be an opportunity. So Rosie gets their number from Amber, and she gives them a call. I punched in the Pendred's number with new determination and counted the rings. 9, 10, they probably weren't home. 11, 12. I started to hang up as it rang the 13th time.
Pendred residence,
a man said in a deathly slow voice.
Dr. Pendred speaking.
I gulped. Oh, hello, Dr. Pendred? I said. This is Rosie Jonathan, a friend of Amber Slade. I waited, but Dr. Pendred didn't say anything. All I could hear was his breathing. You asked Amber to babysit Saturday night, remember? I went on before I could lose my nerve. Since she couldn't, I was wondering if you found anyone else yet. I mean, I'd be glad to sit if you want me to. My pulse pounded in my ears while I waited for Dr. Pendred to answer.
Yes, that would be satisfactory,
he said.
Please give me your name and address, and I'll come for you just after dark on Saturday. It will be quite late when I bring you home. Approximately 24 minutes past midnight.
I gave him my name and address and hung up quickly. He sounds like a character out of a horror film, I thought. The thought gave me a queasy feeling in the pit of my stomach, and I hadn't even changed a diaper yet. So already, Dr. Pendred's seeming a little bit weird, but things only get weirder the next day when she's waiting to get picked up, and the car that comes to pick her up is a black hearse with dark tinted windows. Dr. Pendred is a strange man, gaunt with black hair, slicked back with a widow's peak, and when she gets into the car to drive off, she can't help but blurt out suddenly when she realizes, yo, you forgot to turn your lights on. And then Dr. Pendred slowly reaches a hand up, turns on the lights, and then puts his hand back down. He just has a weird, creepy vibe. On the one hand, it could be a little bit over the top, but on the other hand, I mean, this is a kid's book, so it's a bit fun, but also this has a lot of tension to build because it's going to take a while before we actually see anything crazy start to happen. So I think it's important for building the tension. I really like this silly, campy, creepy guy. And in fact, when we get to their house, this beautiful big manor, we then see Mrs. Pendred, but what truly shocks Rosie is when she sees her, she is old, and she even says she doesn't look grandmother old, she looks great grandmother old. She is wrinkly with fallen down shoulders, and then when she looks at her and Mr. Pendred, she can't help but notice, now that he's standing up, that he has really deep sunken in eyes. His hair, it's dark black, but it's clearly dyed. He's got grey hair all over him. He's clearly an old man. How could two people that look this old have a young baby? But if that wasn't enough, it gets even weirder, because she goes into the house, and of course, because they're quite old, and she sees that it's got old furniture. It has old-fashioned flowery upholstery on the furniture, doilies everywhere. Old people love doilies. There's a weird ornament on the coffee table of a dog. It's got old-fashioned colors. It does look like an old people's home, or she says like a retirement home. Mrs. Pendred welcomes to their home. She says that they have like 39 channels on the TV that she can watch if she likes. They've got a fridge full of snacks, and they're all for her. If she's hungry, she can go for it. And Rosie says, okay, so should I meet the baby? And they say, oh, no, don't worry about that. She's sleeping at the moment. We don't want to disturb her. So you just relax, and you can stay here and watch TV, have a snack if you like. And Rosie says, okay, well, do you want to show me the baby's room then? So I can see where all the diapers and stuff are. Miss Pendred says, no, we don't want to risk waking her up. Just let her sleep. You don't need that stuff. She's a real easy baby to take care of, I promise you. She'll sleep right through. And Rosie's starting to think, this seems like a pretty sweet gig, snacks and, food in the fridge. But, she wants to do a good job, so she says, but what about, can you just give me an emergency contact, just in case something does happen, if she wakes up or if there's an issue. But Miss Pendred just seems to laugh it off, saying, honey, you worry too much. There's not going to be any problems, trust me. Take my word for it, she'll sleep the whole way through. So the Pendreds get in that hearse and they drive off. Rosie thinks that was a weird interaction. Even though she's not a babysitter, she knows that probably wasn't normal. But at the same time, she doesn't really know what to do about it. So she decides, well, hey, I might as well stay here, make sure the baby's fine. It's not making any sound, so we're good. So she goes to sit on the couch, she turns on the TV, and sure enough, it has so many channels. After flicking through it a little bit, she finds a show she wouldn't mind watching. And she decides to get something to eat because they did say there were snacks in there for her. So she goes to the fridge, but the fridge is packed. Like, it is stuffed with all kinds of soda cans. It has different kinds of deli meats and cheese and pickles, a coconut cream pie, a chocolate cake, and even has 3 frozen pizzas in the freezer for her to eat. So Rosie decides to take full advantage of this gift. So she puts all the pizzas in the oven. She grabs chips, she grabs all kinds of stuff, she grabs soda, and she gets all the snacks ready, puts them on the couch, and gets ready for a good watch in. And she absolutely stuffs her face. She's having a great time. But then she hears a deep rumbling sound. She's not sure what it is. Like, it wasn't street traffic, it wasn't thunder, but it sounded almost animal. Her first thought is that Amber's brothers are pulling a trick on her. They were trying to convince her there was a monster in Boneyard Woods. Maybe if Amber let it slip that she was babysitting, they could have come to the house and might be out there making stupid sounds in the bushes. But she is there to babysit. So Rosie heads down towards the nursery and presses her ear up against the door to see if she can hear the sound from in there. It is deathly silent. At first, Rosie considers whether she should go in, see if maybe the baby needs a diaper changed or something, but the idea actually turns her off because she's still not 100% sure how to change a diaper, and it seems kind of gross. So she decides to not even check because she doesn't even want to risk it. So she goes back and she watches TV for the rest of the night. The Pendreds come home at around midnight, and Mrs. Pendred asks her how all was. Did their baby make any noise? Did their precious make any sounds? And she says, no, slept all the way through. So Dr. Pendred, happy, reaches into his wallet and takes out a $100 bill and hands it to her. And Rosie, she may not have babysat before, but she knows that even her friend doesn't make that much money. So she tells him, no, this is way too much. I can't take this. But Dr. Pendred insists and says, no, you've done a really good job. Our baby slept soundly the whole way through. So you are worth it. This money is yours. At school on Monday morning, Amber is excited to meet up with Rosie and see just how her first babysitting adventure went. Did she have fun? Was it like changing a diaper for the first time? Did she gag? But Rosie tells her, no, I didn't change any diapers or any of that. It was really sweet. I basically just ate food and watched TV. At first, Amber doesn't even believe her, saying, it was so gross, you vomited or something, didn't you? You just don't want to tell me. But Rosie insists. She says, no, it was really, really weird. She tells her all about how old the Pendreds are and how she didn't get to see the baby at all and how she spent most of the time watching TV, but she heard a weird rumbling sound. And when she tells Amber that she was paid $100, Amber is gobsmacked, saying, why did I babysit the Gleasons? I should have let you babysit them and babysat for the Pendreds. $100? Rosie tells her, yeah, but it was so weird. I don't know if I ever want to go there ever again. And I love Amber's response because she says, What? For that much money? You need to go back. I don't care how weird they are. But, I mean, if you don't want to, I'll gladly take your place. And, well, because she does need to pay off her sister's bike, Rosie decides, if I just babysit them for a few more times, then I'll pay off this bike and I won't have to worry about it ever again. But just to ease her mind, she says to Amber, "Oh, by the way, did you tell your twin brothers that I was babysitting? Because I think they're responsible for that weird rumbling noise I heard." And Amber thinks about it and says, I might have mentioned it at dinner. And that's enough to satisfy Rosie that she has some explanation for what was causing that strange sound. So, when the next Saturday rolls around, Rosie goes to babysit for the Pendreds again. When she gets to their house, she wants to go into the nursery, but Mrs. Pendred stops her and says, you must be quiet. The baby had a big meal for supper, and now our precious one is sleeping." But Rosie begs. She says, "Oh, please, can't you at least let her see my face? If she's crying, if I try to comfort her, she's not going to know who I am. She's going to get scared." Mrs. Pendred frowns, saying, "We are not going to be waking up the baby. Besides, if she does wake up, you are not going to frighten her." So Rosie says, "Okay, but could you at least give me an emergency contact? That way, if anything happens and I don't know what to do, I can call you." At this, Mrs. Pendred seems furious. No longer like the doddering grandmotherly type, she seems like a witch. She says, "There's not going to be an emergency. Besides, we can't be contacted anyway. It will be impossible to reach us." And with that, the Pendreds leave the house and get in the car. But Rosie is sick of all this mystery. She decides, I don't care what they say. I am going to see this baby with my own eyes. She goes marching down the hall. She heads for the nursery. She grabs the door, but then she flinches as there's a loud banging on the front door. It was so unexpected, Rosie nearly had a heart attack, but she goes to the front room, and although she's got a couple of thoughts about, maybe it's that monster, maybe it's the twin brothers annoying me, but she says, "Okay, who is it?" And it's Amber. Her friend on the other side of the door says, "Quick, let me in." So she lets her in, scolding her for scaring the crap out of her. So Rosie asks her what she's doing there, and Amber explains that since she said that it was so weird, she wanted to check it out. Amber is wandering around idly, sort of looking around, but she's not looking at the weird furniture. She's obviously looking for the baby. And Rosie says, "Look, do you want to see the baby? Because I was about to go to the nursery." Amber agrees, and she actually seems kind of excited to talk to a friend about how to change a diaper and how she does some of the babysitting stuff that you need to know, give her some of the trade secrets. It's a cute little scene with the friends until they get to the door and Rosie goes to open it and the door doesn't move. Amber says, "What are you doing?" Rosie tells her the door is locked. Amber tries it herself and then looks at her friend and says, "Why would they lock the nursery door?" Rosie's like, I don't know, maybe it locked accidentally when they left. And she's sort of clinging on to that idea because the idea of them doing it deliberately is just way too freaky for her to even comprehend. And I like this moment where Amber says, "Well, this is no good. What happens if the house catches on fire or the baby gets hurt or something? What are you going to do?" And Rosie says, "Can you stop scaring me more than I already am?" So, to try to be helpful, Amber suggests they find the window outside and see if they can look in. So they head outside to the window, and unfortunately it's quite a bit higher off the ground because this is quite a big mansion. So she says, "Okay, you get on my shoulders and see if you can look through the window." So Rosie climbs onto her friend's shoulders and she peers through, but it's quite dark in the room, but she can manage to make out some furniture, like a toy chest, a big crib. Then Amber loses her grip and they both go falling onto the grass together. Amber asks if she saw the baby, but Rosie's not really sure. It was so dark. There was something in the crib, but she couldn't quite make it out. But there was something strange about it. Amber seems satisfied that, hey, the baby's in the crib and it must be sleeping. More importantly, she needs to get home because she actually told her parents that she was in her room studying and that she snuck out, so she really needs to get back before her parents find her. But she tells Rosie not to worry because if there's an emergency, she doesn't need to call the Pendreds, she can call her mother. And now that she knows the window's up here and she can see the baby's in there, if there's an emergency, she can come out here, break the window, and get in that way. Setting aside the fact that Rosie can't reach the window without her friend, it's not a bad idea, maybe she can find a ladder or a chair or something. But just at the end of the chapter, Rosie realizes what it was in that room that looked weird. Everything was in the room and it was all normal stuff, but it was the wrong size. The crib in that room was huge, much too big for a normal baby. Rosie decides not to think about it too much. She goes back inside and decides to get something to eat. I mean, that's the best part about this job, is she gets some nice food that Mrs. Pendred makes for her. So she heads to the kitchen and she opens up the fridge, and there are brownies and buffalo wings and meat and cheese and chocolate pudding, apple pie. But this whole experience has turned her stomach. She's not actually hungry. But as she's staring into the refrigerator, something catches her eye. I had started to close the refrigerator door when I noticed a small pink ceramic bowl with lambs painted on the sides. Finally, I thought, something to prove that there really is a baby in the house. I reached for it and glanced through the plastic wrap as I pulled it toward me. Rice? I muttered and looked closer. It was rice, all right, but little babies didn't eat rice, I reasoned, unless the Pendreds were going to mash it up in the blender with peas or carrots or something. I had started to put the dish back when I frowned and looked closer. A couple of the grains of rice seemed to be moving. I carefully peeled off the plastic and stared into the bowl. All the grains of rice were moving, and they were crawling on something purple and slick and slimy. Eek! I shrieked, flinging the bowl across the room. Maggots! The bowl crashed into the wall. In that same instant, a terrible, rotten smell washed over me. The bowl slid down the wall, leaving a blood-red trail on the wallpaper. The purple slimy thing hit the floor with a splot, and the maggots fell like snowflakes all over the room. You! I cried, and then clamped a hand over my mouth. This was no time to wake the baby. Maggots were everywhere, crawling across the floor, wiggling over the countertops, weaving their way in and out of the buttery kernels of popcorn on the table. Some were even stuck to the ceiling. I loved that scene. It was fun, it was gross, it was building the tension, and most importantly, it's an extra clue in this mystery. And I hope you've been putting the pieces together, because this whole book has this mystery, right? It's why I quit the Babysitters Club. That's the question. And so what is the answer? Why would you hire a babysitter if you don't have a baby? And then why would you have this nursery with a giant crib and they've got weird rotting meat in the fridge? So what's that about? If they don't have a baby, what is in the nursery? And then why do they have all this beautiful food and the channels that they get in the girl to watch all this time? How come they won't give an emergency contact? What are the parents doing at night? All of these questions, all of these clues are adding up to something. But if we want to find out what it is, we're going to keep on reading. So, Rosie spends the rest of the evening cleaning up the absolute mess that has been made in the kitchen. And she even gets rid of that gross, livery meat organ thing. She finds a barbecue fork in a cupboard somewhere, and she uses it to pick it up, and holding it as she puts it in the bin, cleans up all the maggots. And then when she's done, she slouches onto the couch and says, I am never babysitting for the Pendreds again. When the Pendreds get home, they are frantic. Both of them look disheveled. They actually seem to have slightly dirty clothes, like there's mud on the edges of their pant legs, or the edges of her dress. And Mrs. Pendred is wringing her hands, saying, is everything all right? Did anything happen with our precious one? Rosie tries to tell them that she couldn't get into the nursery because they locked the door. And Dr. Pendred comes up with a ridiculous lie. He says, oh, you must have just turned the door handle the wrong way. As though you wouldn't try it both ways. And Rosie knows that she and Amber tried both ways. Oh, she doesn't tell them that her friend visited, but she says, no, I definitely tried it both ways. But Dr. Pendred just sets that aside and says, look, tonight did not go well. We need you to babysit tomorrow night as well, because we need to go out again. Now, Rosie does stand her ground. She says, no, I can't do it tomorrow night. And she even comes up with a lie saying, look, I've got homework to do, I can't do it. And Dr. Pendred, desperate, says, you can bring your homework with you. It's fine. You can do it at the house whilst you're babysitting. We don't mind. Just we need you tomorrow night as well. And Rosie says, look, I'm really not comfortable about this. I don't want to do this. And then Dr. Pendred pulls out the capitalist gambit. He hands her $200 and says, there's more where that came from. We just need you to babysit one more night, please. And even though every red flag has gone off for Rosie, this is past her line, and yet $500 is enough to pay back for her sister's bike. So she decides, okay, yes, I'll babysit again, but on the condition, next time you have to introduce me to the baby before you leave." And Dr. Pendred says, of course, thank you so much." So, on Sunday night, the next night, the hearse comes to her house, and she gets into the hearse and they drive towards the house. But when she gets to the Pendred's residence, instead of going inside, Mrs. Pendred is standing outside waiting for them. And as soon as Rosie gets out of the car, Miss Pendred jumps into the car and says, "Look, I'm sorry, we're already late, we gotta go, bye." And so they start heading off, and Rosie tries to call out and say, "Hey, wait, what? You promised you'd show me the baby." But the hearse is already driving away. Feeling furious at having been tricked by them, Rosie thinks about just going straight home, but she can't do it. Even though she doesn't have that much experience as a babysitter, she's still responsible for this young life. So she heads into the house and prepares for another night of babysitting, but she knows this is the last straw. This is the last time she's ever going to be doing this, because she is done with these games. So she turns on the TV, but she's not really watching it. She just wants some noise in this creepy, silent house. And she's sitting down when she feels a dryness in her mouth, so she heads to the kitchen just to get a glass of water. But when she does, she sees something in the sink. She sees in the plug hole there's a little round ball. At first she thinks it's an olive or a grape, but it's the wrong color. It's almost like grayish white. So she reaches in and picks it up, and it feels kind of slimy in her fingers, but it's been in the sink. And she looks over it in her hands, and then she screams and throws it away when she realizes it's not an olive, it's not a grape, it's an eyeball. So gross. But most importantly, when she threw it, out of her panic, it actually went right across the kitchen and bounced through a slightly open door on the other side. And I like the detail that it rolls through the door, and because this is the basement door, she actually hears as it goes thump, 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 sort of bouncing down the steps. That whole moment happened so quickly that Rosie's second guessing herself. She's like, no, that makes no sense. It can't actually be an eyeball. It must be fake or something. I mean, it didn't feel fake. It felt really slimy and squished, but no, it doesn't make any sense. It can't possibly be real. I need to double check to make sure. So she decides to go into that room so that she can look at it again to see whether she actually saw an eyeball or if she really is losing her mind. So she heads into the dark basement. She switches on the lights, heads down the stairs, and apparently it's got a second light down there, so we get a fun little reveal as she finds the string, switches on the light, and she sees the strangest basement she's ever seen. Because on the one side of it, there's a desk and papers, open book and things on one side, and on the other side, there's a padded leather examining table. It's just like a doctor's office. It's even got little tables with utensils on it for him. But around the walls, all the tables have glass vials and tubing between them, Bunsen burners, test tubes. This place is a laboratory. Rosie reasons that Dr. Pendred is Dr. Pendred. Maybe this is where he sees people, examines them on that examining table, but even that is so strange. Why would you bring someone into your house, into your basement, to give them medical care? Now, this scene is then interrupted by the phone ringing, and Rosie goes up to answer it. It's a brief little moment, and it's slightly odd, but I like it because it does add into the story as we go, because the phone's ringing. It turns out to be Mrs. Pendred, and she basically says, "Look, is everything okay? The baby didn't wake up or anything?" Because she's been a little bit fussy, but I don't think she'll wake up. But even Mrs. Pendred doesn't sound sure, so it's adding a little bit of tension. Rosie tries to ask about any of the stuff she sees. She says, "You locked the door, what's going on? Look, you got to tell me what's going on." But Mrs. Pendred has already hung up the phone. So this is a stretch too far. Everything's getting way too weird. So Rosie calls Amber, because she's a babysitter. She knows what to do in these situations. So she calls the Slade household. So Amber's mum, Mrs. Slade, answers the phone, and Rosie says, "I need to talk to Amber. This is a babysitting question." So Mrs. Slade gives her the phone, and Amber says, "What's up? Why are you calling me?" And Rosie says, "Look, I just got a call from Mrs. Pendred. She thinks the baby's going to wake up, so I need your help. I don't know what to do because the door's locked again." But then, as she's on the phone, she hears a strange sound. The book describes it as a faint, raspy sound. And Rosie, while on the phone, says, "Oh my God, I just heard something. I just heard something." And Amber says, "What was it? What was the noise you heard?" And then Rosie is like, "Well, it was like this." And she recreates it by doing a snorty sound through her nose, like. And Amber says, Rosie, you are panicking. That sounds like snoring. The baby is asleep. Some babies snore. And I love this. It's a little relief of tension. Rosie actually is laughing at herself, saying, oh, I've been so silly. I'm just so freaked out. This house is so weird. Thank you, Amber. So they basically say goodbye to one another, and Rosie tries to relax. She goes up closer to the nursery, and she listens to it. And sure enough, it does sound a lot like snoring. But as she presses her ear up against the door, the sound seems much wetter than she first thought. In fact, as she listens, the sound seems to change, and it sounds less like snoring and more like choking. What started as snorting turns into gasping and wheezing and sputtering, and Rosie just starts to panic. She rattles the door, but she can't open it. She's saying, oh, don't worry, I'm coming, don't cry, I'll be there. As soon as I can get this blasted door open. She tries throwing her weight against the door, bang, bang, bang. But as she's making this noise, she hears that the sound inside changes as well. It stops that choking, gargling sort of sound, and then suddenly becomes growling, snarling. What the hell is behind this door? And then she hears a thud, 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 a huge heavy pounding on the ground coming from inside the nursery. What kind of a baby could make that much noise? She knew it had a big crib, but was it really that big and heavy? She tries running around the side of the house to see what she can do, but as I pointed out, the window is too high for one person to reach. She can't get up there, so she just goes back inside the house, and she decides, look, I just need to find the key to this room. Obviously it's locked. I need to find the key. So she searches all around the kitchen, she searches around the living room, she thinks, oh, maybe I'll try the master bedroom, so she goes in there and she's searching everywhere, but after she's done opening drawers, she stands there looking around, and she realizes the noise has stopped. But rather than relief, she's panicking now. She thinks, well, if the baby was choking, what if it's now stopped breathing entirely? So she runs back to the nursery to listen to it, but sure enough, it's not a sound coming from inside. She calls for the baby, saying, you okay? Are you okay, baby? Please? What am I going to do? She peers down and looks through the keyhole, and she can't really see anything. All she can see is the faint glow of a nightlight. And then she hears heavy panting, heavy breathing, as though someone's just gone from a run. And the panting starts to slow and becomes snoring once again. And on the one hand, yes, Rosie is relieved that the baby is no longer choking. It seems to be breathing fine. It's asleep again. But she does not want to have to go through this again in a moment of panic. She decides she needs to keep looking for that key to this room so that she can unlock it if something like this happens again. But she really can't find it. She checks between the couch cushions. She tries checking in the cutlery drawers. She even checks under the front doormat. She can't find a key anywhere. But then she remembers, of course, the office in the basement. It's the only place she hasn't looked yet, so she heads down the stairs and into that creepy basement. Oh, and I forgot to mention, it is past midnight at this point. This is long past when the Pendreds should be home, and so we don't know what's going on with them, why they aren't here yet, but more importantly, it's also begun raining. And when I say raining, it's actually storming. We've got some real classic horror thunderstorm, crack and lightning going on outside. So it's really setting this scene for what we're building up to. Now, the best place to find a key in this area is obviously that desk. I mean, that's where you keep stuff in the desk drawers. So she looks in the desk drawers, but she can't really find anything in them. So she looks over the desktop, but her eye is immediately drawn to the book that's right in front of the seat. It's obviously open to a page where Dr. Pendred was reading, but when she looks at the book, she realizes that he wasn't reading, he was writing, because it is covered with a squiggly handwriting. And each block of text is prefaced with a date. This is some kind of journal. So after all this build-up, after all this, we're finally going to get the reveal here. So this is fun and interesting. And I'll also add, so as she's reading the entries here, she starts to hear like scraping upstairs, like moving furniture. Obviously the baby's moving around again, but she's reading these entries. So the first thing she reads is something saying, look, soon we'll have to get a new babysitter, but I don't think she suspects anything yet. Okay, weird. So Rosie turns to an earlier entry, and this one says, look, we are so glad that we found a babysitter who doesn't know what she's doing, because she doesn't suspect a thing. She doesn't even know what's on the other side of the door. Our lovely precious one sleeps, whilst we search the dead for her elixir of life. What the heck does that mean? Rosie sees that the pages before this have all kinds of formulas and sort of chemical symbols all throughout, And she doesn't understand what all this stuff is. She doesn't understand the context. So she decides, okay, I'm going to find out where this all started. So she closes the book, and then she opens the cover and turns to the first page. And this is when we learn the backstory here. The first entry is about the most tragic day of the Pendred's life. They were just having a picnic on the front lawn. Their little baby was playing with their kitten that they had at the time when a car came careening over the curb and crashed into them. Mr. and Mrs. Pendred could jump out of the way, but they were frantic, of course. They went to try to save it, and luckily it was alive, but just barely clinging to life. So they took it to try to see if someone could heal it, but the doctor they went to said that it was such a small thing, it was most likely going to die. Thankfully, the next entry says she's alive, she's clinging to life, but just barely. But the next entry is just as desperate, saying, she's alive, but there's something wrong. She refuses to eat. She's getting weaker and weaker by the day. We're not sure what to do. I'd do anything just to have our precious one eat something. And here's where things get weird. The next entry, Dr. Pendred is happy because he's found the solution. When that car came over the curb, they were so worried about their baby, they forgot about that cat. He realized it hadn't come home, and when he went out looking for it, he saw that it too had been hit by the car. It was long dead, starting to putrefy. So he carefully picked it up, and he went into the house to find some kind of a cloth to wrap it in so he could bury it. But as he walked past the baby's crib, it watched him, and it seemed to be salivating. So instead of burying it, Dr. Pendred took it downstairs to his lab to examine it, and that's when he found that this dead creature, as it was starting to putrefy, there were some kind of enzyme that was being created that only exists in a rotting body. Realizing that this is the solution, he creates that elixir of life he spoke of from the corpse of their dead cat. And this is when Rosie has her first epiphany. That's where they're going at night. That's why they look so disheveled. They're going out looking for roadkill. Now, that's an interesting revelation. We'll talk about it at the end of the summary, but now she's figured out, okay, so that's what they're doing at night, but what's going on with this child? What happens to a baby when you feed it rotting corpses? Well, I hope you're ready for the final answer to this mystery, so strap in. If I scanned the journal, maybe I could find more clues about what was going on. August 17, 1989. Alas, today is my precious one's 41st birthday, and I'm growing so weary. Although I have managed to keep her alive, she has gradually changed into a horribly disfigured creature with a huge appetite. I fear she no longer even recognizes Morty and me. But we love her still, and we must continue our struggle for as long as it takes. Dr. Solomon Pendred. Upstairs, the growling was growing louder. The disfigured monster Dr. Pendred had described in his journal, the 41-year-old baby with the mega appetite, was ranting and raving. Still, I couldn't tear myself away from the book on the desk. There was one more entry. April 23, 1996. After years of grief and terror, we have finally hit upon a solution for our nightly problems. Our precious one's brute strength is unbelievable, and when she wakes up hungry, and we are not there, she breaks out of the house and goes on the prowl. More than once, she has made a meal out of an innocent neighbor. The solution is quite simple, really. We started hiring a babysitter. Then when our precious one awakes and requires a meal, there's no need for her to leave the house. It happened again last night. Fortunately, Morty is quite good at copying handwriting. She merely wrote a note from the girl saying she had run away, which we naturally turned over to the authorities. Unfortunately, we must move again before an investigation can begin, and our precious one can be exposed. No matter, we can always find another babysitter, and pay her whatever it takes. Solomon Pendred. Oh man, I love this twist so much, because all the pieces fit together, but now our girl knows that she is the bait. She is there to feed this creature. She's in so much danger. But before she can even decide to run or to get out of there, she hears the baby scream, "Hungry, hungry, hungry." Rosie wants to go upstairs, but she's terrified. What can she do against this creature? So she looks around the desk, and there's not really many weapons around. The closest thing she can find is a letter opener. So she grabs the letter opener, and she heads up the stairs. But as she heads out of the basement, she hears the splintering and cracking of wood. as the baby is broken free of the nursery. Desperate, she runs back to the phone and she dials 911, but before the call can get through, there's a crack of lightning and the telephone line goes dead. Rosie just needs to run. The escape is right there, the front door is right there, but before she can get to it, there's a huge pounding as this lumbering beast comes racing down the hall, and then it's in front of the doorway, blocking her path. And she sees this baby for the first time. And this thing, the baby is described as grotesque. Even though it only reaches up to her shoulders, it is this round boulder of muscle, but all of its skin is this greenish, brown, leathery, bulging skin. Its mouth is filled with fangs. It's got drool dripping down its face, and it's got this snout-like nose, sharp nails like claws at the end of its fingers, and it's snarling. It's more like an animal than a person crawling around on all fours. The baby slashes at her with its claws, so she goes running into the living room, and she picks up the little dog statue that's sitting on the table to use it as a much bigger weapon, and she ends up dropping that letter opener, because there's no way that's going to protect her from the baby. She's getting ready to throw it at it, or maybe smash it on its head or something, when there's another crack of lightning, and the house is lit up with the bright light, and then goes perfectly dark. It's a blackout. She's looking around. She's not sure what to do, how she's going to fight this thing in the dark. But then the baby starts crying, and she realizes it had a nightlight in its room. It's scared of the dark. This is my chance. So she gets out of the house, and she starts running through the rain to freedom. But Pendred usually drives her here. She's a long way away, and as she's running, the closest and fastest way to get home is through Boneyard Woods. So she heads into the woods, slipping on the rain-slicked, slippery leaves on the ground, things crunching under her feet. But as she's going through the woods, she hears behind her a great lumbering sound. The baby has gotten out of the house, and it's chasing her down. There's an intense scene as it catches up to her, and she's not sure what to do, but she has an idea. She doesn't know what the baby's name is, but the Pendreds in the book, and when they're speaking, they always called it Precious One. So she tries that. She says, Hey, Precious One, it's okay. We'll get you something to eat soon. It's going to be okay. And this stops it for a moment, but only a moment, as obviously the hunger takes over and just growls and leaps towards her. She manages to roll out of the way. It snatches onto her shirt, but it just tears a strip of it off her back, and she gets to her feet and runs as fast as she can, weaving through the forest, through the trees, to get away from this thing. She finds a clearing up ahead, so she races through it, but she realizes it wasn't a clearing. She's actually back at the road. And just down the road, she sees something, and she finally understands why the Pendreds didn't come home at midnight. She sees their hearse crashed into a telegraph pole. In fact, Rosie must be careful because one of the electric wires has fallen down onto the road, so she is careful not to touch it, but she sees that at the back of this hearse, there's so much roadkill that they've been collecting. There's possums and raccoons and rats and even dogs, all dead and smelling horrendous, spilled out the back. But she ignores all that. She just goes around the car, making sure she avoids that wire. And she sees the Pendreds in the front, and she says, Dr. Pendred, Mrs. Pendred. But it's useless. They died in the crash. But then the baby finds her once again, and there's a little brief moment where she tries to run and then loop around, but when she tries, she just ends up right back where she started, and the baby is hunting her down as she's standing around the crash site. And then Rosie gets an idea. She is careful. She reaches into the roadkill and she picks up a dead rat by the tail, and she starts shaking it in front of the baby, saying, "Oh, hungry? You're hungry? Here, come. Yeah, I got some food for you. Here, come get it." And when the baby sees its favorite food, it starts heading towards her, drool dripping out of its mouth. And so she says, "Here, come get it." And she steps around behind that electric wire, which is spitting sparks. And she says, "Go get it." And she throws the rat right onto the wire. The baby leaps forward, jumps on top of it, and the book describes that its skin lights up, sparkling like a neon sign, as the baby is electrocuted to death. Rosie keeps walking home towards her house when her parents start driving towards her, so they get out of the car with her friend Amber. Now, this is convenient, but it's not actually contrived because, like I said, it's past midnight now. Her parents were worried, they couldn't call her because there was a blackout, and so they decided to come and pick her up. And now that they've found her, they're saying, "What's going on? What happened? You got your shirt ripped, you're covered in muck, what's going on?" And she bursts into tears, tells them about the crash that she saw, so the parents go and have a little bit of a look at it. And when they see all the muck and the pendants, they're not sure what all the roadkill's about, and they ask about the leathery body of the baby. And Rosie makes up some lie and says it chased her when she got out of the house, but she doesn't tell them the full truth. So the story ends with her going home. They drop Amber off home, and she's reflecting on what she went through. And then the next day at school, when she meets her friend Amber, she says, "I've decided that I've got the $300 from this babysitting thing, but I've decided I'm only going to tell my parents about the $100. And I think the other $200 I'm going to donate to some animal charity because I'm just disgusted at what the Pendreds were doing with that roadkill." The end. Or it would be if I had been entirely honest with you. But the thing is, I was lying. As I said at the very beginning of this episode, there's an aspect of this book that I really don't like, and I thought the best way to show you how disappointing it is to show you what this book is like without it, and then reveal the dirty trick it pulled, by pulling a dirty trick of my own. So here is a quote from earlier in this book, which explains the actual truth about this story. For context, this scene comes just before the blackout, when she realizes it's scared of the dark, and just before the scene where she runs out into the woods. The monster thrust out its claw-tipped hand. It inched toward me and stamped its foot down on the blade of the letter opener. I stared at it, wishing fervently that there was some way I could get it back. Suddenly I noticed words etched into the handle. Solomon Pendred, DVM. DVM? Hadn't I seen those letters somewhere before? My mind was too petrified to remember. But there was no time to think about it. The monster was moving again. It raised its arms into the air and hung over me. Then it let out a scream. "Arr!" I looked around frantically and grabbed the Dashan dog statue off the coffee table. I swung it in the direction of the monster. At the same instant, a huge bolt of lightning ripped across the sky. It lit up the house for an instant and then plunged everything into total darkness. I blinked wildly and tried to peer through the blackness. Through the window, I could see that the whole neighborhood was dark. Lightning had knocked out all the power. The monster sharply drew in its breath. After a moment, I heard a soft sound coming from the far corner of the room. It was a high-pitched whimpering. Then it hit me. The monster usually slept with a nightlight. It was afraid of the dark. I leapt to my feet and careened forward. I heard the monster's startled growl, but I didn't dare slow down. My eyes had adjusted to the darkness enough to make out the faint glow of moonlight that crept through the crack under the door. The creature's footsteps shuffled after me. I flung open the door and plunged, gasping into the night. Rain was coming down in torrents, but I didn't care. Sucking in great lungfuls of air, I staggered down the lawn and into the street. Arrgh! My heart stopped, and I turned to look over my shoulder. At first I couldn't see anything, then lightning lit up the landscape. The baby creature was standing on the front steps of the house, gazing around in confusion. I stood perfectly still, afraid to move a hair. I prayed the thing wouldn't be able to see me through the pouring rain. Slowly it turned its long, pointed snout in my direction and let out a pitiful howl. Then it dropped down to all fours and galloped down the steps like an animal. I was too mortified to move. I looked down at the Dashan statue still clutched in my hand, and then at the creature coming toward me. They had the same long, low-slung bodies, the same powerful builds, the same sharp fangs. In one horrible instant I remembered what DVM stood for. Doctor of Veterinary Medicine. Dr. Pendred was a veterinarian, and their precious one hadn't been their human child. It had been their dog. So we're going to discuss this book, but we're going to start with that bit because, oh my god, I hate it so much. Because this book is so perfect in so many other ways. I love that build of tension, but all of that tension, it's not just for the sake of being creepy. It's all clues to this mystery, which does fit together so well. So why do they want an inexperienced babysitter? Because then she wouldn't be questioning the stuff that she's not doing as a babysitter should. Why are they feeding her all this beautiful food? It's because they want to make sure she's fattened up as a meal for the baby. Why are they so weird and old? Because the baby's weird and old. Why do they have all these smells coming from their car? And why do they have weird livers and eyeballs in their kitchen? It's because because that's what they're feeding to it. You see what I mean? It all fits together, and then it's not a baby, it's a dog. And I can tell, based on the clues, that this was a last-minute change. Obviously, there was executive meddling, because someone read through this book and went, okay, creepy, but dead babies? Yeah, I think that's a step too far. I don't think we should do that. Let's roll it back a bit. And so they changed it from a dead baby to a dead dog. And you can tell this because, as in the book, it says that the baby was hit by that car, but it didn't actually die. The baby was alive, so even though they gave it these weird mutant, dead people enzymes or whatever, the baby is alive, and it's 41 years old. Dogs and Dachshunds don't live to 41 years old, so that doesn't actually make any sense. That's just some weird magic at that point, whereas this book is sort of leaning into the idea that it's just mutated because of these weird deadly enzymes. It's made the baby sort of part dead itself. And then, of course, the crib, the nursery, all of this stuff, it is acting like a baby. And if you wanted this to be a dog the whole time, then you would have made it a dog. It would have been Why I Quit the Pet Sitters Club or the House Sitters Club or whatever. And you could have made this story work with a weird pet that she never sees. Maybe they could say it's sleeping, or maybe they could say, oh, well, it's misbehaved, so we've locked it in the basement, so you're not allowed to go in there, we're punishing it, but just make sure you fill up its bowl or whatever. I don't know. You could still make this work, but obviously the only reason they didn't do that is because they liked that title, Why I Quit the Babysitters Club. I praise that title because it's a reference to the Babysitters Club books. That's why they did it, and yet they changed it from a baby. They failed to fulfill the promise of the premise, and it's so annoying. And this isn't actually the only time when they back off of something. Like I said, the parents, when they are going out at night, it says they're getting roadkill. But no, they're not. Or at least they weren't in the original version. I know this because when they come home, they've got mud and dirt around the edges of their clothing, and they're going out at midnight. You don't need to go out at midnight to pick up roadkill. You can stop on the side of the road and just chuck something in your boot. But the only reason I can think why they'd be going out at midnight is they are digging up dead bodies. That makes more sense to me. And you could even have it, obviously, at the end of the story, it probably would be a bit too gross if when she wants to lure the baby to that power line, if she had to pick up, I don't know, a finger or something. So it would make sense to me. You could even have the plot work that they went out and they couldn't find a dead body. So okay, there's no bodies in the graveyard that we can dig up. They're all bones. Maybe we need to go and pick up some roadkill. We're desperate. We need something. So that could sort of explain away that scene so that she could pick up a dead rat as opposed to, I don't know, hanging a severed head or something. I don't know. It's probably a bit too far. And I understand that both these things are too far, but it offered something, it promised something bigger, and then it pulled back, and that is just so disappointing. So, okay, well, the rest of this book is pretty good, in my opinion. Like I said, I really love that build of tension. I love that all of the clues that are in the story are there just to ramp it up that little bit more, go that little bit further. It's got so many weird questions, throwing in the creepy people and having the lightning storm during that last night. That's so good. This book also has an interesting balance of tension and relief. This ties into the characters as well, because not only is there that tension with all these different clues of okay, this is freaky, oh, that's a red flag, what's going on here, it occasionally has those cut-offs where it's oh my goodness, what was in that? And it's oh no, it was just her twin brothers were probably just pranking you. And oh my goodness, what's going on here? What's that strange sound? Oh no, it's just the baby snoring. Don't worry about it. So it means that the story doesn't feel like it's just ramping up and getting ridiculous. It calms down now and then. But I also really like how things that happen in the story, none of it feels contrived. Everything fits neatly into place. Like I said, her going down to the basement, it's because she found an eyeball. What's the eyeball doing there? It's there because they're feeding the thing dead bodies. Obviously, they have to cut them up in the kitchen or something. So why did the parents come there at the end? Because, well, she didn't come home at midnight when she was supposed to. They wanted to make sure she was okay, and there was a blackout. Everything fits so neatly together. This is beautiful plotting. This is the kind of plotting that I aim for, where everything's just so neatly fits together. No horrible hanging loose plot threads. And there's some fun character moments as well. I really like. I actually laughed when her sister, after she's crashed her sister's bike, her sister's oh, I've got a gift for you. But the gift is some hand-me-down clothes. But the hand-me-down clothes are they're dirty and they're all looking gross. And so she doesn't like them at all. And so our main girl says, I wouldn't wear these to a dog fight. That has got to be harsh, right? Because to me, that's saying these clothes are so bad that even if I was doing something that nobody would want to do, something horrible, a crime, I would still be concerned about wearing something this ugly. I wouldn't want criminals and animal abusers to see me wearing this. It's that bad. That is harsh. And there's some other little jokes in there. Like, I like when she's talking about the babysitter, she's like, I don't want to do this. And her friend's like, hey, if they're going to pay that much money, I'll do it for you, you know? It's got some fun little character moments. The character moments are so much fun that it means that this book was a lot of fun. And I honestly, when I'm looking at this book, okay, to me, this could have been an A. I don't think A+, because to me, it's got a couple of issues where it seems to rush through some scenes, and there are some little things that I think could have been tweaked to make it even better. But I can't even give it that, because that pulled back twist, the failure to plumb the promise of the premise, is so much that to me, this book is a B+. You lost out because you offered something and then took it away. I have to mark you down for that. So, what can we learn here? Well, the first thing, and I think this is the most obvious. Now, I know that I was complaining about them not fulfilling the thing, not making the baby a baby, turning into a dog, but my issue isn't actually with that. I think the lesson we have to learn here is the line. Everybody has a line. Now, the line is just a nickname. Its full name is The Line I Will Not Cross. So obviously in this book, the issue is that everyone has a line, and if you are publishing a book, you don't just have to worry about your line, you have to worry about the publisher's line, you have to worry about the reader's line, especially your audience, and with kids, sometimes you also have to worry about the line of the parents. The point is, obviously the writer was willing to go that far, and the publisher wasn't, and so they needed to pull back. So I think the lesson to learn here is, familiarize yourself with the line, with your line that you will not cross, because if you want to offer something like this, if you want to offer a story this dark, you need to be prepared to actually pull it off. I think this book, as it is, I'm assuming the publisher just wouldn't have published it at all with dead babies and grave robbing. So if this book was Why I Quit the Dog Sitters Club, I would have had no complaints. The whole way through, I would have been expecting a dog, and then I would have been confused when I see that it's actually monstrous. She never gets to see it, and then it turns into this huge creature. That works. What doesn't work is offering something and taking it back. So the way to avoid that is to know your line and make sure you build your story from the ground up under that line, so that you know you don't have to even risk crossing it. And yeah, dead babies, that's a good line to have. Like I said, I was fine with it. I thought it was scary and horrifying, but these are for little kids, so there's nothing wrong with having a line. Just make sure that you don't write so close to it that you end up disappointing people when you don't cross it. But the second thing this book does so well, and I think everybody needs to learn from. I think I mentioned in the past the importance of tension. When writing a horror story, just being blah, scary monster, like that's not very exciting. It can be a good finale, but that's such an adrenaline rush, that's all that stuff happening at once, that it's better to build up, have that slow tension, the building tension. But one thing I didn't mention is that tension, on top of tension, on top of tension, can be exhausting, and not just exhausting because it can be a bit of an adrenaline rush, but also because people get tired of it. They see it coming from a mile away. If you're like, oh, they're in a haunted house, and there's a zombie in it, and the house is on fire, and the house is falling off a cliff, and the cliff is on fire, and now the world's going to explode. You know what I mean? Like, it starts going up, up, and up, and you might think, oh, if I keep doing this, it's going to add more and more tension, but ironically, it doesn't. It's what I call the Shan paradox. It's when you add so much tension that the reader goes, well, I know that obviously the world's not going to explode. I know that you're not going to burn the main character to death because that's too far. But what this book does, and it is so good at it, is it adds those moments of relief. That's the important part about tension. You need to balance tension and relief. So in this book, for instance, she's worried about the sound outside. She doesn't know what it is. It could be some monster. And then Amber says, oh, it could have just been my twin brothers. I might have mentioned it. Like, okay, relief. We have an explanation. And then, oh, there's a strange sound coming from the back there. What could that possibly be? Is the baby choking? And then, oh no, the baby's snoring. Don't worry about it. So this book balances tension and relief, and what this means is that you can continuously ramp up tension, but because you are also offering those moments of relief, instead of it being this sliding scale up so that people think it's ridiculous, you instead get this sort of a sawtooth of tension, relief, tension, relief, tension, relief. You can continuously build up tension without reaching the stars. Really, story structure is all about tension and relief. In this sense, with a horror story, it's about that tension of the fear, the threat, but you can also have dramatic tension, you can have emotional tension, you can have interpersonal tension. But the lesson here is it's not just about building tension, it's about offering some reprieve, offering some hope so that the reader can follow you from the beginning of your story to the end. So, that was Bone Chiller 17, Why I Quit the Babysitters Club. A very odd entry, and the first ghostwriter who was actually a ghost who I couldn't find, so that's interesting. The next book we have to look at in the series, unfortunately, is not so interesting, but to figure out why, we're going to have to talk about that in the next episode. So, until then, hey, if you thought this was scary, just wait to see what I've got in store for you next time.